The sky was still dark when 12-year-old Julia rose from her matted bed. With small fingers, she reached for the wooden tray at the head of the bed. On it lay a pile of ripe oranges. The girl had washed them the night before. One by one, carefully checking for dents, she began to put the fruit into a bowl. Today she had to go to the market again. Maybe she could sell enough to buy bread. Or maybe not. From the other room came muffled voices. Mother was arguing with Grandma again. "I told you, Mom. There's no more money." Mother's voice trembled. "What about the money from the last take?" Grandma whispered. "I bought Kenny some medicine. He's still feverish. He couldn't even eat yesterday." There was a moment of silence. Then Grandma sighed heavily, the way one sighs when one no longer knows what to do. Julia sat silently, hugging her knees. She knew what they were talking about. Her younger brother, Kenny, had been coughing badly for a week. His eyes were bloodshot. His body felt like fire. They were taken to the nearest clinic, but the nurse just shook her head. No treatment without payment. Julia closed her eyes, driving away the tears. The last time her mother had begged the same nurse, she had sold her wedding ring, an old sewing machine, and even Julia's own school books. But even that hadn't been enough. There was an uneasy silence outside the window. The village had been alive before. Children running around laughing, women braiding their hair and chatting, boys chasing each other with sticks. But now everything had changed. In the last 3 months, 2 children had disappeared. The first was 10-year-old Tina. She had been walking alone from the stream and simply hadn't made it home. The second was Anita. She had been last seen by the mango tree. After that, no trace, no note, no hint. Julia stood up slowly, pulled on her worn-out slippers and picked up the bowl of oranges. Her dress was faded and torn at the sides. She had outgrown it long ago, but she had no other. Outside, the morning chill touched her cheeks. It was a 40-minute walk to the market along a road covered in red dust. Step by step, with the bowl on her head, she headed there. She thought about her brother, about the clinic, about the silence in the house. Reaching the edge of the market, Julia went to her usual place under a large tree with wide branches. She sat down and carefully placed the bowl in front of her. "Fresh oranges," Julia said quietly. "Sweet and ripe." People passed by, not paying attention. She had only sold 3 when she noticed a man standing at a distance, staring at her. He was tall, with dark skin and silver hair. His face was serious. His clothes were neat, a light traditional tunic and sandals, not a speck of dust. He was clearly not from around here. He did not smile, did not wave, just stood there, his hands behind his back, looking at her for too long. Julia looked away, feeling uneasy. But then the man slowly came over and sat down next to her. "How much?" he asked, pointing at the oranges. 10 coins, Julia whispered, without looking up. He picked up one of the oranges, held it up to the light, then spoke again. "Are you from around here?" Julia hesitated, then nodded. "What is your name?" "Julia." He looked at her face for a long time, and then, without saying a word, bought 5 oranges and left. But when he disappeared into the crowd, Julia felt a strange heaviness in her chest, as if someone had squeezed her heart with cold fingers. She did not know who he was or why he had spoken to her, but his gaze, too intense, too long, gave her goosebumps. Towards noon, Julia returned to the market, but not to sell, but to buy. There were only a few oranges left in the bowl, and in her fist a little change, which she had quietly taken from her grandmother's tin box. She approached a woman with a basket of herbs. Her name was Mrs. Sarah. She sometimes helped. Julia held out the coins with both hands. "Please, I need something for the fever." Mrs. Sarah looked first at the girl's face, then at the money. "It's not enough, dear," she said softly. "My brother is very ill, please, Mom." The woman sighed heavily, tore off a piece of dried leaves and wrapped them in an old newspaper. "Brew this with water. Let him drink it, little by little. But if his eyes roll back again, take him to the clinic." "Thank you," Julia whispered. As she turned to leave, she suddenly felt someone's gaze and looked up. Across the road, next to a stall selling palm oil and yams, stood an elderly man in clean clothes. He was clearly an outsider. Too neat, his shoes untouched by dust, His posture betrayed the habit of power. His skin was dark, his beard neatly trimmed, his gaze penetrating. His name was James Johnson, although Julia did not know that yet. He was not buying anything. He was simply looking straight at her. Their eyes met, and Julia immediately jumped up and ran away. The man didn't say a word, just turned and headed for Mrs. Sarah's table. "This girl," he said quietly. "What's her name?" "Julia," the woman answered, surprised. "A good girl. Her brother is seriously ill." The man nodded. "Does she come here often?" "Almost every day." He nodded again briefly and left without buying a blade of grass. Late in the evening, when the sun was already setting, Julia sat outside the house, slowly peeling one of the remaining oranges. Kenny lay on a thin mat nearby. His breathing was weak, his lips dry. His mother, Mary, had tried everything she knew: oil, cold rubs, prayers. But the fever did not subside. They simply waited. And suddenly there was a sound. Not a motorcycle, not a bicycle. A car. Big, smooth running, the kind you only see in the distance. In a city, on the dusty road stood a shiny black car. Too clean, too new, not from here. The back door opened and Mr. James Johnson got out. He was dressed in a long blue suit, his shoes were shiny, and he was holding a brown envelope. Without looking back, he walked straight toward them. "Good evening," he said calmly. "Good," Mary answered, narrowing her eyes. "I came to talk to your daughter." Julia stepped back, her heart sinking. "Her name is Julia, isn't it?" "Why are you looking for her?" her mother asked warily. "I saw her at the market today. She reminded me of someone." He held out the envelope. "I want to offer you a ransom." Grandma Ruth came out of the house, a broom in her hand. "What did you say?" "I want to marry your daughter." "No," Mary said quickly. "She's a child, and you're a grown man." "I understand," he said softly. "But your son is dying. I can help." Tears appeared in Mary's eyes. "You don't even know us." "I don't need this," he said quietly. "Sometimes we just do what needs to be done." She looked at the envelope. It was plump. "With this money, Kenny will get treatment today. You'll have food, clothes, shelter, school, everything." "That's not our way," Mary whispered and turned away. "Take your money." But that night, in their dark room, under the dim light of the lamp, Mary was still holding the envelope. Julia sat next to her, her hands shaking, her eyes swollen from crying. "Julia," her mother finally said, "that man, he offered—" Julia froze. "He wants to marry you," Mary managed. "He said he'd help us. He said Kenny would get better." "No," Julia said firmly. "He's old, older than Grandpa. I don't want to be sold. I'm only 12. Mary began to cry. "I have nothing else, Julia." And then there was a hoarse, strangled sound. They turned around to see Kenny convulsing. His eyes rolled back in his head. "Jesus!" Mary screamed. "Kenny!" They picked him up together and ran barefoot toward the clinic. The light was still on inside. "Please," Mary begged the nurse. "My son is dying." "Where's the bail?" the nurse asked coldly. "We have no money, but we'll pay." No collateral, no help. Kenny was already limp. They walked slowly out into the night, broken. Later, in the silence of the room, Julia looked at her mother. "I agree," she whispered. "What?" "I will marry him, if it will save Kenny." The next morning, James returned. "They are already taking him to a private clinic," he said quietly. Julia nodded, saying nothing, but everything inside her was clenching. There was something elusive in his voice, in his movements, in his toothless smile. Alarming. The village began to wake up. There were no songs, no joy, only the rustle of footsteps on the dusty ground and whispers. In the hut, Julia stood motionless. Grandmother was tying beads around her neck. "Small, but they will hold your name." The dress wasn't hers. It was old and faded. It belonged to another girl. She'd gone and never returned. No one spoke of her. Mary fiddled with her hands in silence. Kenny had been taken away before dawn. Julia stood alone. Outside, they were whispering, "Is this true? For that old man?" She hadn't even agreed. She was only 12, but they had no choice. And then James Johnson appeared, impeccably dressed, calm, confident, like a man who had done this before, more than once. He walked to the center of the yard and stopped. One of the village elders cleared his throat and opened a tattered book. The ceremony was short. No music, no singing, just quiet prayers, a few lines of scripture, a nod from the leader. "Do you accept this girl as your wife?" the old man asked. "Yes," James answered calmly. Julia was not asked twice. She did not say a word. She simply stood there, her head down, looking at the dust at her bare feet. No rings, no dancing, no treats. Just looks and silence. When it was over, James turned and walked toward the car. Julia followed him, holding nothing in her hands. People parted without saying a word. Some looked away. Some could not tear their eyes away. "He did not even look at her," the woman muttered. "His face is like stone," someone whispered. "Something is wrong here. I can feel it." James opened the car door. Julia got in without saying a word. The road was long. The car drove up the slope to where the village ended and a strange, unfamiliar world began. Julia had never been to that part of town before. At the top of the hill, she saw it. The mansion, huge, silent, standing alone like a sleeping giant. High gates, clean walls, glass windows reflecting the sky. The car stopped. James got out first, without turning around. He went to the door and unlocked it. Julia followed, still silent. The air inside was cold, too clean, too quiet. No pictures on the walls, no voices, no warmth. He led her into a small room, a bed, a chair, neatly folded clothes. "This is your room," he said, and he was gone. The door closed with a soft click. Julia was alone. The silence was thick, sticky. Only the hum of the ceiling fan and the beating of her own heart. The walls were the color of cream. The floor was cold tiles. Everything was too right, too neat. A small bed with white sheets, a wooden chair by the window, a soft rug, and a nightgown, neatly folded on the edge of the mattress. She didn't sit up. She didn't cry. She just stood there. Her dress hung like a sack on her fragile body. Her hands were icy. In her head, there were only scraps of other people's conversations, whispers, warnings. "He'll take what he wants. People like that always do. You're his wife now. Just close your eyes and don't resist." Julia sat slowly on the edge of the bed, pulled her knees up to her chest. She looked at the wall. Her body wouldn't obey, but her thoughts wouldn't stop. A few minutes passed. Then the door opened. Mr. James was standing with a tray. He walked in slowly, put the tray on the table. Soup, still warm, and a neatly folded napkin. "You need to eat," he said softly. It was the first time he spoke directly to her. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Then he went into the next room. The lock clicked. Julia remained seated. No touching, no orders, just the soup. She looked at it. The steam rose slowly, like smoke. This was not what she expected, not what she feared. And yet, the soup had grown cold. The fan rotated overhead, casting reflections on the ceiling. She lay, then sat, then stood by the window. She could not sleep. The silence here was not peace, but something else, oppressive, making her heart beat louder. At some point, she went to the door. She pulled the handle. It was unlocked. The hallway was wide, cool, lit by a soft light. Bare feet made no sound. Everything looked too perfect. The air smelled of lemon and something else, strange, incomprehensible. She passed a tall bookcase, then saw a light. Under the door, a jar. Julia came closer. Inside was a large room, a thick carpet, a lamp, shelves of books. In the center was Mr. James. He was sitting in a leather chair, in simple house clothes. Not reading, just sitting, hands on his knees looking into space, as if listening to something no one else could hear. She was standing by the door. Then he spoke without looking. "Can't sleep?" Julia hesitated, then came in. He turned, his gaze softer than before. "Come here." He handed her a thin notebook. "Write," he said. even if it's just thoughts. Why? She whispered. Because stories help you understand everything, he said, and you'll need them soon. She looked at him. His face was calm, but there was something tired in his eyes, something distant. Turning her head, she saw another corridor, and at the end, a heavy door made of dark wood, with a strange brass handle. "What's in that room?" she asked quietly. James didn't move. His voice was soft, slow. "Some doors aren't ready to open yet." She looked at the door again, then at him. He added, "Everything will become clear in time. And now, rest." Julia asked nothing more. She walked out slowly, clutching the notebook to her chest. In her room, she sat on the bed and looked at the cover for a long time. Then, for the first time that night, she laid her head on the pillow and closed her eyes. And fell asleep. Somehow, in spite of everything. The morning began with the quiet clink of china. Julia opened her eyes. Mr. James was standing at the door, again with a tray. On a wooden board, a cup of tea, biscuits in a cloth, and a small glass of orange juice. He entered quietly, put the tray on the table next to the bed, then looked at her. "Good morning," he said softly. She blinked at him. "You don't have to come out," he added just as calmly. "Just rest. You're safe here." He left and the door closed again with a soft click. Julia stared at the tea. The steam rose in thin strands. The aroma was sweet, not at all like the bitter infusion her grandmother made. The cookies were warm, soft, wrapped like a present. She touched them carefully, as if she were afraid they would disappear if she blinked. And so the next few days began. James brought her comforts: warm tea, soft bread, biscuits with honey, sliced fruit. And each time he said very little. He did not ask her for anything, did not come too close, did not touch. Julia stayed in her room. The bed was neatly made, and the old clothes were replaced by clean, soft dresses, peach cream, sky blue. On her feet were slippers that did not rub. Once he brought her a scarlet dress with a flower pattern and said quietly, "I thought it would suit you." She did not answer, but he did not seem offended. He knocked on the door, put down a tray, said a few words and left. Never raised his voice, never demanded anything. And in a strange way, this was the hardest thing. Julia had prepared herself for fear, pain, silence. But this quiet, delicate treatment was disconcerting. He treated her like fragile glass. Not the kind you hit out of pity, but the kind you put on a shelf under the soft light because it was special. She didn't know what to do with it. Every night she wrote in the notebook he gave her. Sometimes she drew pictures, sometimes she just wrote her name over and over. Once she wrote, "Why is he kind?" She didn't know the answer. And then one morning he knocked on her door. "Do you want to visit your family?" he asked. Julia looked up, her heart jumping. "Really?" "Yes," he smiled faintly. "I already sent word. They'll be home." The car was waiting at the porch, the same one that had taken her brother away. She sat alone on the way, her palms pressed to the glass. When they pulled up to the house, her mother was standing outside, a thick scarf tied around her neck. Her grandmother was sitting on a stool by the hearth, but Julia's gaze immediately caught Kenny. He was sitting, not lying down, not shaking, just sitting, spoon in hand, eating porridge. His eyes were clear, his cheeks were rosy. He looked at her and smiled, and she, unable to resist, smiled back. It was a quiet day. The house was silent. The clock on the wall measured the time with a tick. Julia was sitting in her room with a notebook on her lap, but she was not writing. For the third time, she had drawn the same flower. It was her third day in the mansion. She had just returned from her family. Seeing Kenny smiling, seeing that he had become stronger, it brought her a relief she had not expected. But now she was bored. Mr. James Johnson had left in the morning without saying where. He had only said, "Food is in the kitchen. I'll be back before evening. Don't worry." She watched from the window as the black car disappeared over the hill. Hours later, she wandered down the hallway, touching the walls. She was already familiar with the study, the kitchen, the garden behind the glass door. But one door remained unknown. At the very end of the hallway, it was always locked. Today, the handle turned. The door was open. Julia's heart began to beat faster. She looked around. The house was quiet. Slowly, almost silently, she pushed the door. The room was dimly lit, but warm. The cozy light of the lamp illuminated the walls, completely covered with photographs. Many dozens, perhaps more. Children, boys, girls from different countries and lives. Some were smiling, some looked tired or wary. Under each photo, a name and a date. Some dates were crossed out with a red cross. Julia came closer. The names: French, Asian, unfamiliar. A girl with a teddy bear, a boy with crutches by the river. Girls in school uniforms with books. There was a trunk in the corner. She knelt down and slowly opened it. There were neatly folded notebooks, letters, in envelopes, and simply folded sheets of paper. She took one. "Dear Mr. James, I passed my exams. I am now in secondary school. Thank you for helping me when I had nothing. You are my angel." She opened another. "You don't know what you have done for me. I sleep peacefully now. I eat every day. I don't cry at night." Another one. "The violin you gave me still plays. I named it after you. Thank you for being kind when no one else was." Letter after letter. Words of gratitude from children, especially the girls, for caring, for protecting, for teaching, for food. Julia clutched the papers to her chest. She didn't know what to think. And then she felt it, a quiet presence behind her. She turned around. James was standing in the doorway. His face was calm, his voice soft. "Perhaps it's time to tell the truth." She froze, holding the letters in her hands. James walked in, not shouting, not showing any anger, just tiredness. He closed the door behind him. "I suppose you have questions," he said quietly. Are these all the girls you married?" she whispered. He shook his head quickly. "Number I found them. They were in danger. They were sold, forgotten, given away. I didn't marry any of them." He looked straight at her. "You were the first." "Why me?" she whispered. He sat down on a chair. He sighed heavily. "Because you were going to be married off anyway." He was buying girls. Some were kidnapped. Some were just taken. "I saw the way he looked at you at the market, and I knew you were next. You're lying." "I wish I could," his voice shook. "I had two options. Let him get to you, or beat him to it." Julia looked at the photos again. Now she understood. These weren't trophies. They were monuments. James walked up to the wall and ran his finger along one of the panes of glass. "For 20 years, I traveled through villages, through countries, looking for those who were forgotten. Not always in time." He pointed to the crossed-out photos. "Some couldn't be saved." She dropped the letters. He took out a notebook and read. "I learned to read. I never thought I could. Thank you for believing in me. Sometimes I paid for school. Sometimes I dug wells. Sometimes I just listened. I wanted to adopt some, but the system wouldn't let me. I did what I could, quietly, without paperwork." "Why not open a school? You had the money, right?" He grinned. "There were. But I sold almost everything. And the main thing is that money doesn't always decide. Sometimes the law listens to those with power, not hearts. In my case, if it became official, it would be banned." He looked into her eyes. "I married you because it was the only way I could buy time. I'm already old. I needed to give you a choice, the one you never had." She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by children's faces, letters of gratitude and the truth that she didn't expect. For the first time, she saw in James not a mysterious man, but a man who had spent his life saving those who no one else had saved. And she understood. He didn't save her because he had to. He did it because there was no one else to do it. In the following days, they hardly spoke. But now there was something new in the silence, quiet but intense. He still brought her tea, left her cookies. But now there was something different in his gaze. Calm. Julia spent her days reading, writing, and watching the light in the house change throughout the day. James spent his time either in the garden or in the library, or sitting silently in the armchair of his study, enveloped in the same calm silence that had accompanied him all his life. But on the seventh morning, everything changed. Julia waited for the familiar, barely audible knock on the door. But it did not come. No smell of tea, no sound of footsteps on the tiles. The house was eerily quiet. Barefoot, she walked out into the hallway, the cold floor burning her feet. The garden bench was empty. The library was silent. The study seemed frozen. Finally, she approached the door that he always kept closed, his bedroom. She knocked once, twice, no answer. Her hand trembled as she took hold of the handle. The creak of the door broke the silence. There on the bed, in his dressing gown, lay James Johnson. His silver hair lay on the pillow, his eyes closed, his chest still. He was calm, silent, gone. Julia didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She just stood there listening to how loud her own breathing had suddenly become. He knew. He felt the end was near. That was why he was in such a hurry. That was why he had chosen her. He was dying, and he didn't want to leave without giving someone one last chance. Julia walked slowly to the bed and sat down next to him. Her fingers trembled as she opened the drawer of the nightstand. There was an envelope with her name on it. She unfolded the letter. "Julia, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And that's okay. I've lived my life. Now it's your turn. In the office, you'll find documents. Now all my property belongs to you. The land, the savings, the house. But the main thing I'm leaving you is not money. It's freedom. Don't waste it." Julia clutched the letter to her chest and wept. Not from fear, not from incomprehension, but from love. News of James Johnson's death was first whispered among the servants, then a call to the lawyer in town, and soon the whole village knew. People brought flowers, whispered prayers at the gate, looked on with bewilderment and sympathy. But the real shock came from the will. 4 days later, the lawyer, Mrs. Williams, arrived with a folder in her hands and a stony face. In it was a handwritten, certified, legally binding document. Julia, a girl of only 12, was listed as the sole heir of James Johnson. The village was speechless. Mrs. Williams read the will to the elders. She explained that James had bought the house only a few months ago. He knew that time was short. Everything had been thought out to the smallest detail, and now it all belonged to Julia. Some blessed her, some cursed her. The girl's mother fainted under a mango tree when she heard the news. The elders gathered the next morning, discussing everything behind closed doors. The children pointed at her. How is this possible? Just a week ago, she was selling oranges. He married her mother for the papers. It's witchcraft. And Julia was silent. She did not justify herself. She did not cry. She did not run away. She only listened, just like James did. In the mansion, she sat in the library, touched the books he was reading. She ate the same stew that he brought to her room. She sat in his chair looking out the window, beyond which everything was as before. The silence no longer frightened her. On the third day, Mrs. Williams returned with a new folder, with papers on the transfer of property. "There are enough funds here to provide for your future, up to the university and beyond," she said quietly. "Now you do not need to decide everything at once, but we must appoint an official guardian to manage the property until you come of age." Julia looked up. "Do I have to leave?" she asked, barely audible. Mrs. Williams blinked in surprise. "No, this house is yours now. James had made that clear. You can stay here as long as you like." Julia sank into the easy chair, and the realization came to her slowly, like rolling waves. She had her own bed now, her own books, her own keys, and most importantly, the right to make decisions. The first of these surprised everyone. She opened James's books, called Mrs. Williams, and laid out her instructions clearly. From the remaining funds, money was to be allocated, not to herself, but to the village and the children. She ordered the clinic that had once refused to treat her brother to be completely renovated, so that no child would be turned away for lack of money. On the very spot where Julia had once sat in the dust selling oranges, she founded a school. She bought desks, books, a uniform, and personally paid the salary of the first teacher. And then she gave another quiet order. From that day on, any attempt to marry off a girl under 18 in secret must be registered. She kept the register herself, right from the mansion. It was impossible to hide anything. They called her dangerous, cursed. But there were others too who began to call her by a new name. The girl who returned with fire. On a cloudy day, Julia went to the cemetery. The wind played with the leaves, and in her hands was a photo frame. James's favorite photo, a mirror under a flowering tree. At a fresh grave, she knelt and whispered, "You were not my husband. You were not even my father. You were my light." Weeks passed, then months. The mansion on the hill was no longer just a home. It became a refuge, a place where the girls could sleep peacefully, study, eat, and start life anew. It was not only Julia's home, it was a home for all of them. 9-year-old Jemima ran away from an engagement to a man 4 times her age. She came in a torn dress with an empty look in her eyes. 11-year-old Binta had run away from the uncle who kept her captive. She stood at the gate, barefoot, almost silent, and Julia let them in, not as a queen or a savior, but as one of them. She gave them rooms, food, but most importantly, safety. Sometimes at night, she walked the halls with a notebook and a candle, listening at the doors for nightmares. Once, while cleaning James's library, she picked up his favorite book, the one with the red spine and gold letters. An envelope fell out. No name, just the words, "If they come for you, do not be afraid." There was a list inside, names, dates, places, politicians, diplomats, powerful people involved in child trafficking under the guise of tradition, monsters who were covered up. James watched them. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, he wrote, "Speak, Julia. Burn away the darkness. The light cannot be extinguished if it knows who it is." That night, sitting in the library, among the portraits of the rescued girls, she made her second choice. She would not just build a house, she would create a movement. A year passed. The name Julia Johnson was known around the world. The former bride from the forgotten village became the voice of millions. It all began with a journalist from Lagos who came to check out the rumors about the 12-year-old heiress. But he found not a sensation, but a revolution. She grew not only in stature, but in strength. When she spoke, ministers listened. When she wrote, thousands read. In her hands was James's list and the support of Mrs. Williams. He exposed the hidden networks, named names, broke the silence. They tried to stop her, with threats, cyber attacks, slander. But it was too late. James left her more than a house. He left her proof, a plan, and an army. By 14, Julia was speaking at the UN. At 15, she had helped change laws in 3 countries. At 16, she was back where it all began. No guards, no cameras, just her. In front of her was a school, the one she had built. The girls around her laughed, held books, wore smiles instead of chains. "Are you a queen now?" the girl asked. Julia smiled. "Number queens wear crowns." She tapped her temple. "I wear fire." That night, while the village slept, Julia sat in the library again. The shelves were full of new books, letters, and portraits.